there are classes that are not able to participate live that would like to watch this after the fact. And this video will be posted to my website called the Center of Excellence for Entrepreneurship Speaker Series. So just keeping that in mind, if you do want to turn on your camera, some of you might become famous. You don't have to come up to the camera, but it makes the session a lot more engaging if we can see students' faces and they come up and talk into the microphone. If not, feel free to raise your little hand on Teams here and I'll moderate the chat and speak on your behalf, okay? Before my last housekeeping item, I am running a contest through my website. I'll attach the Microsoft form. It's a 5-minute contest. It's a scavenger hunt of my website, and your class could win an all expenses paid pizza party from wherever you want, dessert, drinks, pizza, your call. Okay, so that is that. So I'm going to hand things over to Lisa to present today.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Jill. That pizza party sounds fun.
Yes.
Great idea. So I'm always happy to come and present on financial literacy topics. And this budgeting one is one that I've given many times. Very important information. Hopefully you guys are all going to get something cool and interesting out of it. And you'll learn why it's so important and why you should start kind of early and thinking about this. So I know on the call today, we have people of all different ages, and that's great because the earlier that you start learning about these kinds of concepts, the better. So I'll just really quickly tell you who FCNB is. So we're the Financial and Consumer Services Commission of New Brunswick, and it's kind of a long name, but essentially we're what's called a provincial regulator of financial services and products. So different people within New Brunswick that deal with our money. People like payday lenders and mortgage brokers and real estate agents, just to name a few. Those are some of the industries that we regulate. And part of our job as the regulator is also to do financial literacy and outreach to New Brunswickers. So that's kind of part of why I'm here today. So I'm always happy to share some of this information and get people talking about money and why it's so important. So hopefully we're going to kind of dive into that right now. So my first question is not only what is a budget, but I want to put it out to the groups to see some feedback. When you hear the word budget, what's the first thing that comes to mind? So that's what I'd like to hear from some people. And again, you guys can raise your hand. You can let us know through Jill how you want to answer. But I'd love to hear what people think of when they first hear the word budget.
Anyone, and welcome to Madame Legier again. So Mr. Healis class says saving money. That's saving a great answer.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Any other ideas? What is a budget?
Saving money is definitely a good one to mention. I did this presentation once to a group. Oh, saving money appropriately. I can see that pop up. And someone told me that it was boring. And I said, well, okay, I'll give you that. Hopefully I can make it more fun and meaningful to you today. But I gave them that. It was a fair answer. There's no wrong answers.
I think your presentation's great. I remember you talking about saving for a swimming pool when you did.
Yes, my story's coming about the swimming pool for sure. Yeah.
Okay.
But basically, when we think about a budget, the top thing to keep in mind is that it's simply a plan. It's simply a way to kind of track your money, to know where it's going and how you can spend and save it appropriately. So that's kind of what the big picture of it is. It's just a plan. It's just a way to see what's happening with your money. So I always like to kind of review what makes a budget not work. So in order to have one that works, it's really good to make some indications or talk about what makes it not work so we know what not to do. So the first one is thinking of it as a bad word. And I usually like to use the example of Harry Potter here. Now, I'll admit, I didn't read all the Harry Potter books, but I've watched all the movies multiple times. So I was a very big fan of Harry Potter. And in the movies, the bad guy was named Lord Voldemort, and no one wanted to talk about him. All through the movie, they said, "He who shall not be named," right? And this is how we look at budgeting sometimes. It's like this bad word that nobody wants to talk about. So we want to change that. And we want to make people realize that when you think of a budget, it can be a good thing. It can be a way to get the things you want. That's how we want to kind of spin it. So we want to look at the positives. Budgeting, way to get the things you want, okay? And the first story that I want to give up or kind of talk about on that line is my swimming pool story that Jill is familiar with. So when I was about 12 years old, I started asking my parents for a swimming pool. And I asked them every year for many years. And every year they told me no. Now, mind you, back in those days, we didn't talk about money too much in the family. And I'm so excited that we talk about money more now. It's great that we're talking about it earlier and people are understanding the cost of things. But back then, we didn't talk about it. I'm sure my parents probably couldn't afford it, but they didn't want to tell me. We also lived in the woods where there was a lot of mosquitoes, so they probably didn't want to put one in. But the bottom line was I asked them every year, and every year they said no. And finally, when I was about 17 or so, I had said to my parents, a little bit, I'll admit defiantly, when I'm older, I'm going to get a swimming pool. And my mother kind of laughed and said, well, maybe you will, Lisa. You'll see what happens when you get older. And that was kind of that. So we'll fast forward a few years. And I was in my early 20s when I had my son. I was living in Ontario and I ended up moving back to New Brunswick. And I moved in with my parents. I was having some financial issues and I wanted to get on my feet again. And it was right around the time when what we called a bladder pool came out. So you guys have probably seen them, the blue pools that had the ring that you blow up. And they were about 12 feet around. So picture 12 feet, not really big. And I saved as much money as I could to buy that pool. And I set it up in my parents' yard. And my son and I played with it like every day that it was nice in the summer. And we swam in it and we splashed in it. And every few years, it would bust and I would save my money as I started working again and making a little bit more money. And I bought a new one right up until about 6 years ago when I was able to install what I call real pool. Okay. So the one that stays up all year round. And we finally got that installed in probably 6-7 years ago. Again, loved it, have lots of fond memories of it. So you're probably wondering why she's talking to me about pools and what does this have to do with budgeting? So there's two reasons why I tell this story. The first one is that you don't have to give up on the fun things that you want to do in life while you're saving for that bigger item. So for instance, when I bought that little pool, I was able to have, that same kind of joy. I wanted to be able to play in the pool and do what I could. And even though it took me many years to save for the big pool that I wanted, I never gave up on that dream. So if something's important to you and you really want to save your money for it, that can be a great reason to be budgeting. It can be budgeting towards something that you really want in life. And the second reason I tell this story, and for me, it's the even bigger lesson here, is that I made do with the money I had at the time to have those fun memories. So that little 12-foot pool that I had gave me the same joy and the same fun as the big pool that I have now. I have all the same memories that playing in it. So it's really important to look at your finances realistically for what you have at the time. And maybe there's some fun ways that you can do those same things you enjoy with the money you have instead of going into debt, trying to buy something with money that you don't really have at that time. So hopefully that story kind of helps you realize that no problem. You can still, save for things, have those things that you want to build and budget for, but also realize there could be other ways to have fun with the money that you have at the time. So my next one kind of goes along with we give up too quickly. I also use we give up too quickly the same way as I think of a diet. So when we think about dieting, and some of you, I'm sure this has happened to over your lifetime, we decide Monday, I'm going to go on this diet. I'm never going to eat cake again for the rest of my life. And I'm going to stick to it, stick to the plan. And then about 2 or 3 days in, somebody brings, cake to school or cake to work, and you have a little piece, and then there's some chips, and there's something else, and you start eating a bunch of of treats, and all of a sudden you say to yourself, oh, well, the diet can start again on Monday, right? So we kind of give up. And budgeting is the same principle. If we say to ourselves, we're never going to spend money again, that's not realistic. So we really have to look at a budget as something that has to grow and adapt, which is my third point. So I want to put out to the group now, when you think about budgeting, what are some times of the year that you think you need more money than others? When would we say that you might need more money at certain times of the year? Anybody have any ideas?
And I see we have a lot more schools joining us, which is amazing.
Christmas.
Okay, so Mr. Healis, Christmas, yep.
Anything else?
And feel free to turn on your cameras, teachers.
Absolutely.
And have students approach the microphone. Holidays, winter, yep.
Perfect. Yes, all good points. Holidays, yes. Christmas. Which would be all the different ones, right? Like it could be Easter, it could be birthdays. Somebody just wrote birthdays. Christmas is definitely the one people talk about the most. What about March break? If you want to go on holidays on March break, you might want to save money for that. What about when you start school? So first of the school year, you need school supplies, you need things to start your school year. So you might need money. Yeah, someone just said back to school. So that's why a budget needs to be adaptable. So it's really hard if we make a budget and we say, okay, this is my budget for a month, and we expect it to work every month of the year, because there could be other things that you need to save for at different times of the year. So looking at those things on a yearly basis is going to be much more beneficial to you. For example, if we know Christmas is coming, and we all know it comes in December, and we say we want to have $600 to spend for Christmas, let's just say that. Sometimes it's really hard to think, oh my goodness, December's here, I need $600, I don't have it, and we get stressed out about it. If we look at it in January and we say, well, that's really, $50 a month, it's a little over $10 a week. $10 a week now, that seems much more manageable. And if we start putting that aside now, then when Christmas comes, we're ready for it. So you can use a budget in kind of that manner as well. So we can think about all these things and be ready for them ahead of time. And instead of having to find that big amount of money all at once, we break it up into these smaller chunks, and it's much more easier to do. And we don't prepare for surprises. So that one, definitely we've all seen this. The pandemic definitely showed us that there's lots of surprises can come up financially. So it's always a good idea to think about those things and start to remember ahead of time, okay, there could be unexpected things that come up. I'm thinking for the students that are getting ready to graduate, there's going to be surprise things that may come up when you start college or university or go out into the workforce. And there could be things like your driver's license renewal, or there could be certain expenses that only happen at certain times of the year. Or if you drive a car, there could be lots of repairs that come up for those kinds of things. So it's probably not realistic when we're really young to have, a big stash of money set aside for surprises right away. But it doesn't mean that we can't start thinking small and at least putting a little bit at a time, and you will be surprised how fast it grows. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. And my last point on this slide is we don't track the little things. And I want to jump ahead to kind of have an example of that here. So I'm going to use buying coffee as an example. Or we can use, getting a pop, or we can use getting a fancy drink at Starbucks, or anything like that. I always want to start by saying, I'm not saying you can't go out and have a coffee or, buy a treat. It's not that. But a lot of the times people will say to me, well, I don't really have any extra money. Like, I don't know how I would budget because I don't have any extra money. And I would challenge you to say that you're probably spending money that you don't even realize. And if you look at eating out in the cafeteria every day, or just different things that you buy on a daily or weekly basis, you might be really surprised how quickly that adds up. So if we do the math here, if you just put $4 a day aside, just as an example, In 1 year, you would have almost $1,500 in 1 year. It's just
Wow.
mind blowing how fast that would grow. So I have a new question to put out to the group. Let's say we all start this today. Everybody does it. And next year, we all get together the same day and everybody has $1,460. I would like to know what you're going to do with that in a year's time. Throw me in some examples. And again, no wrong answers. I'd love to know, what would you do in a year if you've saved, you put aside that money, you saved it, what would you probably do with it? Any ideas?
Madame Legier's class is typing an answer. And vacation, saving for school, investing. Ooh, Madame Dempster's class says invest. College,
Excellent.
spend
Awesome.
it.
All great answers.
Buy a guitar, Mr. Healis's
Nice.
class.
Somebody wants
Yeah.
to buy a guitar. I always wanted to learn how to play the drums. I know that's an aside, but I never ever did it. So maybe that's still going to be on my bucket list to do.
Campobello Island says buy a car. And
Nice.
Madame Dempster from Milledgeville North, save it again and start over.
Oh, excellent.
Yeah.
Those are all wonderful answers. And the point being here is that there is no wrong answer. And it takes it right back to my original point about the positive aspects of budgeting. So it can be for anything. It can be to spend on something you really want. And it could, like some people said, a car, some people said a guitar. For my earlier example, it was to buy a pool. So of course we have to pay all of our bills and all of our debts. And we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. But if you're going to put aside your, say, coffee or drink money, as an example, and you want to save it for something fun, there's nothing wrong with that. And that might be a great motivator to make you do it. So that in that year's time, you can buy that thing you've been waiting for, and you don't have to feel any guilt about being in extra debt for it. You can also invest it. You can also save it. You can also do all of those things that people mentioned here in the examples. So the bottom line is, using a budget to get the things you want in a positive way is what's going to motivate you to keep going. So I hope everybody kind of puts that in their back pocket and kind of remembers it as they start thinking about, I wonder where my money actually goes. You know, how many times do I go to Starbucks or Tim's, and if I really want to save for that guitar, let's use an example. Maybe if I just put a little bit aside, or maybe if I only went 1 day a week and had my treat and saved the money the other days, I would get me to that goal faster. So hopefully that will help you guys think about where you can find extra money if you're looking to kind of do some saving. So now we're going to jump in to the main event and how you build your budget. And basically, it's 3 steps. So I want to keep it nice and simple so that it's easy to do. And we've got to go back to kind of some of my tips. We've got to be honest. We've got to be realistic. We have to look at a budget with the money that we actually have. And again, these are great habits to start at any age. Even if you're in middle school, it's a good idea to just start using these concepts, even if you don't have a lot of money, because it puts you in the habit of doing it. And as you get older, it's easier to continue that habit. So we want to be honest. We want to be realistic. We want to make it adaptable. We want to be able to realize that, okay, I have 3 family birthdays in March and I know that it's coming. So maybe I can start putting a little bit aside early so that I'm ready when that comes, just as an example. So let's look at the 3 steps. Step 1 is your income, or your money coming in. And that will be gathering your financial information. So it can be obviously pay stubs. Some of you might have a part-time job, working at a store, mowing lawns or shoveling driveways or babysitting. So you might already have, some income coming in or some money coming in that you can start to look at. Obviously, bank statements are a great place to see where you're spending money as well. So if you have a bank account, the bank will send you, a lot of times you can see it online through their apps, or you can have it sent to you on paper, but you can really look at where your money is going and see where you're spending and saving. Obviously, credit card statements are something that you would use as you get older. So, and we're going to talk about credit here closer to the end of the presentation so that you understand how credit cards work. but they're also a great way to see exactly how you're spending. And of course, any receipts or bills are all good things to consider. So you want to gather all of your financial information into one, but especially income or the money coming in. And think about all the places that you're bringing money in. When you graduate, you may have a student loan, and that money might be coming in. You might get money as an allowance from your parents or your grandparents, or someone else is giving you regular income or money. That's something to consider too. So it's really important to kind of give all of those things a place in your budget. So that's step one, money coming in. Let's go off to step two, money going out. That's your expenses. So my first question I want to put out to the group is, when I say a fixed expense, anybody have an idea what you think that might be? What do you think a fixed expense would be? Let's see if we get any answers. Any ideas? When you think about the word fixed, what could that mean?
Oh, Madame Legier's class
Okay,
has an
excellent.
idea coming up here. An expense you always have, Mr.
Okay.
Hewitt says. That's a great
That could be, that's a kind of a
answer.
good way to look at it. Absolutely.
Mhm.
Anything else? Something that is always there. Yeah,
So yeah, Campobello,
perfect.
Miss Singer's class. And oh, we have some more answers coming in.
Okay.
Memberships, Mr. Van Snick. An expense you already planned, Miss Henderson. Amazing. Great answers.
Those are great answers. Perfect. And you've pretty much kind of covered them all in different parts of your answer. The bottom line is a fixed expense is an expense that stays the same. And some examples of that could be like rent or your mortgage or your car payment or maybe your insurance payment. And someone had mentioned memberships. So if the payment is always the same, that would be considered a fixed expense. So for example, if your rent is $1,000 a month and you pay it on the first of every month, it's pretty easy to track that in a budget. You write it every month, the first, you owe $1,000, you know it's always going to be the same. So if fixed expenses stay the same, what do we think of variable expenses? Anybody have any ideas? So if fixed stays the same, what do we think variable could be?
Miss Henderson's class is typing an answer.
Excellent.
Let's see. It doesn't stay the same. Yeah.
Perfect.
Madame Legier. Expenses that vary. Mr. Healis, expenses that are varying. Mr. Healis, you are a fast typer. Madame Legier, prices that are not the same every month. Exactly.
Perfect. You hit the nail on the head again.
Mm-hmm.
So it could be an expense that you have every month, but it likely will change. And some great examples of that, somebody just wrote it, what I was just about to say, gas and groceries. Those are probably your biggest variable expenses. And we see all the time in New Brunswick, every week the gas price goes up and down. So it's really hard to figure out sometimes in a budget, well, what do I put down for a variable expense? I know I have to pay it every month, but how do I account for it in a budget? And that's a great question. So a little tip on how to do that is maybe track it for a few weeks. So let's say, for example, I know we have some people in high school, so we're going to assume that maybe they're driving a car. Let's just, for our example purposes, say they have a car and they're driving their car. So if you have a car and you know you have to put gas in it, then it's really great to go and drive around for a few weeks, drive to all your normal places. So go to school, go to your work. If you go to like soccer practice or you have sports or anything like that, all the places that you'd normally go, that will give you the best idea about what you actually spend every month or every week, sorry. So let's say, I'm going to do this for ease of math. Let's say $50 a week you're spending in gas, okay? So in your budget, it's probably a good idea to put a little bit more if that's a necessary expense. So I'm going to back up a little bit. Maybe we need to ask ourselves, do I have to have a car? And this is a really great example again, for those that are in high school, maybe about to graduate, as an example, might want to look at that. Do I need to have a vehicle? Am I going to live close to my work or school? If I don't have to have that expense, maybe I can take that out of my budget and use that money for something else. But if we realize that no, maybe I live out of town or I live farther away and I have to have a vehicle to get to my work or school, then we can put it in as a variable expense that we have to have. And maybe we're going to have to save somewhere else because we need to have the car to get ourselves to work or school. So we're going to put the budget, say, at $60, okay? And we're going to watch that. Again, these things have to adapt. And you might see with the fluctuating prices that it needs to be a little more, a little less, whatever. So let's watch it for a few weeks and see if we kind of go around that amount. What happens maybe in another couple of weeks where you have this conversation with some friends and you decide, oh, we all kind of live near each other, let's carpool. So I saved a little bit of money one week. So instead of spending 50, what I normally spend, I only spent maybe 40, but I budgeted for 60. So this is a really important point of budgeting that I want everyone to get. That in my budget, if I've put aside $60 and I only spent 40, that means I have $20 left over. That money needs a job. And this is so important for budgeting. Really, ideally, you want to leave it in the gas fund, because what happens if the next week something comes up and you have to travel somewhere? If I spent that $20 on a pizza, now I don't have any money to go and do that traveling that I really needed to do. So all of the things that you have to pay for should have a place in your budget, and that money can stay in that category. And that's what's going to help keep you on track. So instead of kind of dipping into those places, if we can stay in kind of the lane of whatever we're saving for, that's what's going to keep you kind of the best way on track with your expenses, for sure. So that's an example about how to set a variable expense in a budget. And thirdly, irregular expenses. So these are things that come up that you don't expect. And they're kind of what we talked about earlier. If you have birthdays, if you want to go on vacation, if you had emergency car repair. So something has come out of the blue, and that's kind of saving for those things. And some of them can be all the time. Like I mentioned before, maybe you're going to buy your car insurance once a year instead of once a month. Maybe you're going to have to get your driver's license renewed, and that's every few years. So you want to be able to think of those things as well, because when that irregular or unexpected expense comes up, you want to have some funds to kind of deal with that. And I want to touch quickly on debt payments and savings. So obviously, when you're young, hopefully you don't have too many debts, right? So some things that you might be paying for, it's, again, depending on what age you are, if you're driving a car or not, you might be paying gas, you might be paying insurance on the vehicle, you might be helping pay for the car with your parents, depending on what kind of money you're making, or you could have other things that you're paying on. Maybe your parents loaned you money to buy something and you're paying them back, that kind of thing. So we always want to be paying our debts, and it's very important to make that a priority. And when you're young, thinking before you put yourself in debt is such a great concept, because you want to think, how much am I actually paying for this? And what's the true cost going to be in the end? And when we get to credit in a few slides, I'm going to get into that a little bit more. But for now, the main thing here is to remember that we always want to put our debts in our budget. We want to make sure anything we owe is taken care of before we spend on anything else. And finally, savings. So this one is really important. And I can't stress enough how important it is to start as young as possible. And again, it goes back to, I'm going to say this many times through the presentation, it's developing the habit. So the more you do it, the easier it is to keep doing as you get older. So when I think about saving, when I moved back to New Brunswick from Ontario, like I mentioned earlier, and I was starting over again, I sat down and I said to myself, what can I realistically put away every month? What do I know I can commit to? And at that time, with the money that I had and what we were getting paid at that time and everything, because that's probably at least a little over 20 years ago for sure, I would be sitting there thinking, I can do $5 a month. I knew I could do that. And I literally went to the dollar store and bought a jar and took the $5 bill and put it in the jar every month. And I watched it grow. And then when I got a little bit more money, I started putting more, and I opened a bank account and put the money in the bank account and started to watch it grow and grow. And what that helped me do, it was the act of actually putting the money that made me realize, okay, this isn't so bad. And as I started putting some away, it was easier to add another $5 instead. So it's really setting up that habit is what the main objective is here. And the younger you start, the better, because then it becomes easier to do it. You can even do these things with your bank accounts now and make it automatic. So you can say, I want to put $10 a month into a savings account, and it'll come right out of one bank account and they'll put it into another, and you don't even have to worry about it. You can make this all automated now. So even more interesting to do than maybe the dollar bill in the jar that I did. But for me, the visual worked. So whatever way works for you, that's great. The main objective is just to start, and it doesn't even matter so much the amount. It's the act of doing it. So that's step 2. So I'm going to recap. Step 1, money coming in. Step 2, money going out. Let's go to step 3, the last step. So step 3 is adding them up. So we want your budget to balance. So we want to have all the money coming in. We want to subtract all the money going out. And ideally, we want to be at 0 at the end. And I've had people in the past say, well, if it was a really good budget, shouldn't we have money left over? And that's an excellent point. And what I say to that is, give all your money a job. That's kind of my catchphrase. So if you've got money left over, it needs a job. It needs a place in your budget. So let's say you've put everything down and you have $40 left, okay? If you're a minus, then you might have to relook at your expenses and say, okay, where can I cut? Where can I change things? Or maybe make more money and make it balance out. But if you have money left over, ask yourself, do I want to save it? Great, let's put it in, let's make it automated, put it in our savings. Maybe we want to invest it, go a little bit further with the savings. Excellent, that's a great option too. Maybe we want to pay a bill with it. Also great. Put it onto the bill, put it in your budget, put a date to pay it. It's all going to work out. It's going to be counted for. Maybe everything in your budget looks great. It's all organized. Everything's great. And you just want to go out and have a pizza with your friends once a month. Also perfectly fine. You have the money left over. You've paid all your bills. Everything is in your budget. So this is leftover funds. And it's up to you to decide what you want to do with it. It goes all the way back to what I said at the beginning. These are the kind of positive aspects of doing a budget. If you've got that money left over, put it in your budget as night out with my friends to get a pizza. And then you know where it's going, it's accounted for, and you don't have to feel guilt that you didn't pay something or that you should be saving it because you've already done all that in your budget. So that's a great way to kind of make a budget that's balanced and make a budget that works. So any questions kind of about that? I'll just throw that out there now before I go on to the next kind of piece. Everybody still with me?
Questions, comments from anyone?
Perfect.
Okay.
Awesome. So the last kind of piece of this puzzle is keeping track of your budget, right? And I was old school. I literally got a book from the dollar store and wrote it all down. And sometimes you can do things like putting it in a calendar. I liked calendars because you could see the dates, right? You definitely want to keep track of it somehow so you can see. What's great about a calendar is that you can avoid maybe missing a payment. So a lot of the times we put things into our budget and we remember, okay, it's automatically withdrawing from my account, let's say. So it's going to get paid on a certain date. So if we write down those dates and we see what's in our account, we can make sure that everything we need to pay, the money is there when it needs to be. So on this slide, it talks about at the end of the month, see how closely you followed your budget. But if you really want to have kind of a better idea, even if you took a little check on it weekly, just to make sure, okay, next week, these things are automatically being paid. okay, I'm good to go, money's there, and you don't have to stress about it. So this is a great tool to keep track. And it can be, like I said, in a book, there's lots of great apps. And sometimes your financial institution even has kind of free apps that go along with your account, and you can look at what's happening there. They'll make pie charts to tell you where your spending is. So I encourage you to kind of look into these options and see what will work for you. And sometimes some of these things, just try them out and see what's going to work best for you. The main tip that I would say here is just find something that's easy and that you find is adaptable for you. So if it's writing it down is better, try that, or vice versa. So now I want to go over a few more steps before we come on the end. What are we for time there?
Probably about 5 to 10 more minutes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So I've got a couple
Maybe
more things
5.
to cover, and we're coming on
Okay.
to the end. So
Okay,
I
great.
want to just quickly go over a few things about spending, things to think about, and then I'll cover credit really quickly at the end. Just a quick example of how that works. So a few of the things that you can do, these are things you can do before you spend. And the first one is I like to call a triple check. So we say to ourselves, ask yourself these 3 questions before you buy something. Do I want or need this? Where's it going to live? And does it bring any joy to my life? If you can't answer these questions, then maybe it's time to take a little pause and wait. Wait a few days. Think about it. I always say to myself, if I go back and it wasn't there, then it wasn't meant for me. So it's really good idea to take that little pause. Sometimes even asking yourself those questions quickly in a few minutes before you hit, buy on the website or in the store before you go and make the purchase. It'll stop you from buying things that maybe you don't really want or need. And if you don't know where it's going to live and it ends up in a drawer somewhere in 2 weeks, why are we spending money on these things? So sometimes it's just that little pause will stop you. I like to say the next one, avoid emotional spending or spending under the influence. And when I say that, I mean emotional influences. We had a fight with our friend, or we're having an argument with our parents, or we're sad, or we're angry, or we're frustrated, and we want to get some retail therapy. We think, if I buy something, it's going to make me feel better. And what I would challenge you to do is come up with a list of things that you like to do that don't cost money. And it could be go for a walk in the woods, or play a board game, or make a puzzle, or read a book, or get in your jammies and watch a movie, or call a friend. Could be have a bubble bath. All these things you can do to kind of make yourself feel better without buying something. So that might be a way to kind of help with spending. Knowing what you can afford to spend, that comes directly from a budget. As soon as you make a budget, then you know how much money you actually have. Using credit wisely is the last thing I'm going to cover. Research products and compare prices. So that one, super important. Nowadays, you can always go online, read reviews, check, what the return policy is, what the warranties are. You want to know all these things. And you want to not only compare the price, but compare what you're getting for the thing that you buy. Let's say you're buying a new cell phone. Find out what's all involved in that cell phone before you actually sign on the dotted line. Maybe there's things that they're selling you that you're never going to use. So it's really important to look at, okay, it's not just the price. Am I getting the value for what I'm paying for? And finally, reading the fine print. So that is super important. I kind of look at this, especially online, we're all guilty of it. If there's, all the kind of legal fine print, and then you scroll to the bottom and there's a little checkbox and you say, yes, and you just agree to the terms and conditions. And I'm guilty of it too, I will admit it. There could be things in there that you've agreed to that you don't even know. And sometimes you see that with subscriptions. It might be, okay, I'm going to do this free trial for 3 months. But in the fine print that you agreed to, it says in 3 months, you're going to be charged this big amount monthly. And all of a sudden it starts coming out of your account and you're like, oh my goodness, I didn't know I was paying for this. So reading the fine print is crucial so that you can really understand what you're agreeing to before you sign. Very, very important. So the last thing that I kind of want to touch on is credit. And again, I realize there's lots of different ages on the call today. That doesn't matter. The point about credit is it's really important to understand how it works before you get a credit card. And usually credit cards, you have to be the age of majority to get one. In New Brunswick, that's 19, I believe. But it doesn't mean that you can't understand how they work beforehand. So I'm going to kind of touch on these. I'm going to use this example to illustrate it, which I think really drives home how this works. So these three people, Jennifer, Megan, and Mark, all got a credit card. First week in university, they got a free credit card. And I should say the credit card is free. Usually there's no, unless there's a fee, a yearly fee. A lot of the times you can get a free one. But the card itself might be free. But when you start using it, this is where the cost starts happening. So for these guys, $650, they want to buy a TV. And their credit card interest rate is 19.99%, which is a common amount. A lot of times with department store credit cards, you can get up to like 30%. So a lot of interest that you're paying sometimes. So let's look at Jennifer as our first example. She buys the TV and then she pays her card off right away. So I have a question for you. If she pays her card off right away, why did she bother putting it on a credit card to begin with? If she already had the money, why would she do that? Anybody have an idea? Why would you bother doing that? Okay, I can't hear you, Jill, but
Sorry, I was muted.
that's
Madame Legier's class said to build your credit, which is a great
absolutely
answer.
yes.
Wonderful.
Perfect. So
Yeah.
that's exactly why she would do it. So with credit, that's a piece of why you might, it could be a positive way to use it, right? If you pay off in full before you have to pay interest, and typically it's about 3 weeks. So what happens is the credit card or lending company gives you about 3 weeks to pay it off in full before they charge you interest. So if you do that, you're building a great credit history. And it tells, lending institutions when they look at this, and they use this a lot oftentimes to decide about lending you money for other things like buying a house or buying a car or going to school, say. If you want to get a loan, they'll look at that and they'll say, okay, Jennifer, she pays her bills on time. She doesn't miss any payments. She's not a big credit risk. Then maybe I'm going to offer her this loan. So using credit that way is great. Let's move to Megan. So Megan also says, okay, I want to buy the TV. I have a plan. She put it in her budget. She said, I'm going to pay $50 a month. It's going to take her about 1 year and 3 months to pay it off. And she's going to pay about, let's say, $90 in interest. Okay. So in the grand scheme of things, that's not so bad. She'll probably have the TV longer than she's paying for it. She didn't have the money up front, so she made a good plan. She put it in her budget, and the cost over time wasn't too much. But I'm going to tell you the number one thing I want you to remember about credit. So this is the thing I don't want you to forget when you leave this presentation today. That if Megan only puts the TV and doesn't buy anything else, then this example will work fine. If she buys more things but doesn't pay more on her credit card, then she's going to keep going further and further and further in debt. So for example, she buys the TV, then she goes out to dinner with her friends, and then she goes to buy some new outfits at the mall. And then she bought a desk for her dorm room. Now, instead of owing $650 on her credit card, she owes $3,000. So if she doesn't up her payment, the interest is going to keep growing on that bigger amount, and she's not paying enough to pay it off. Then you could get into a situation like Mark, okay? And Mark is sitting there going, well, I'm going to pay the minimum monthly payment. And on a credit card, it'll usually tell you on your statement what the minimum monthly payment is. So let's say for this example, it's $10. So he says, well, I put it in my budget. I'm going to pay $10. That's great. If you look at the example, it's going to take him over 8 years to pay that TV down. And that's if he doesn't buy anything else in the meantime. So again, by paying those minimum payments, yes, it's fine. Your credit will keep growing, but you're going further and further and further into debt. And if you don't pay more on it, you get into a cycle of debt that's really hard to get out of. And then you got to ask yourself, am I even going to still have this TV? So I'm still paying for something that may be in a landfill in a few years, but I'm still paying for it. So that's an important concept to kind of start to understand about credit, is that it can have lots of advantages, but you have to really consider the downfalls. And that's the interest that you're going to pay if you don't pay it off in full. And what in the long term you're going to end up paying and how much that's going to cost you. So those are important concepts to remember. So that's really what I wanted to cover today. I always like to put on, I should slide myself over here so I don't block all of our numbers. We always have all of our information about FCNB. We're on social media. You can always reach out to us. We have tons of free resources. I also want to say that being the provincial regulator, we can provide that unbiased source of information. We don't endorse a company over the other. So we're here to help New Brunswickers make those informed decisions about things that relate to their finances. So I hope that you'll turn to us and get the information that you need when you're making those big decisions, even past what we learned about today. So I'd love to open it up if we have any time left for any comments or questions.
Anyone? I want to thank Lisa. So FCNB is our new partner and they're incredible. They have partnered with me at the Center of Excellence for Entrepreneurship, and Lisa, as you can see, just does an incredible job explaining such important concepts to middle and high school students. Teachers, I have sent you an email with Lisa's email address and also with my website for additional resources. I've also included the schedule for other sessions this week. Lisa's doing another one on Thursday afternoon on investing. So TFSAs, RRSPs, all of those neat kind of things. And lastly, I've included a link for a scavenger hunt of my website. It's a contest. So every class on this webinar has a chance to win a $200 pizza party. So thank you so much, everyone. This will be recorded. Please spread the word to colleagues that missed the presentation and they can watch it on my website. So thanks again.
Thanks so much, everyone.